Is property ownership worth it? I see a lot of debate online about renting versus buying, and in this video I want to break it down for anybody interested, for myself as well, because I am interested in buying property eventually. Well, the first factor that I found out you need to take into account is the cost of the property itself. That includes the down payment and also closing costs associated with realtors, lawyer fees, and certain other expenses that come with property transactions. This can add on anywhere from 3 to 5% to the purchase price of your property, so you'll need not just the down payment but this as fixed cost as well, compared to renting where you probably don't need to come up with anything except a month or two's worth of deposit. If you are new to the country, especially in North America, you might have to get a bigger deposit, nowhere around that 10 to 20% down payment, plus that 2 to 5% of other closing costs. And then comes, in my opinion, the bigger aspect, opportunity cost. What is the opportunity cost of buying property? And to calculate this for yourself, every case is going to be different. I recommend going to Zillow, Redfin, or whatever property website that you use. A lot of these sites have mortgage calculators. Mortgage is essentially the interest plus the principal that you'll be paying, the monthly payment for owning the property, and is very important in any rent versus buy decision. I use myself as a guinea pig. I use this website called condos.ca. I live in Canada, I live in Toronto, and a property of my interest would be a 2-bed, 2-bath condo, for example, or a similar property, and in an area that I would like to live in. That comes out to around $699,000. Insanely expensive. It's just Toronto. I don't know what to tell you. Anyways, the key part here is the mortgage calculator. Here, I can input the mortgage rates. Currently, fixed rates are going anywhere from 4.3 to 4.5. So I'm just gonna take 4.45 as an example, since that's the last fixed rate that I saw. It also allows you to specify your down payment. For me, that is $70,000 because that is realistically what I do have right now for a down payment. So that would be 10% off the value of the property. These websites also calculate the taxes and the maintenance, plus the mortgage payment, giving you a total monthly payment of $4,575. To round up, we can say $4,600. Now, what would actually happen if I rented this place instead of buying it? Well, not exactly that place, but I found a similar listing in a similar area for $3,100. That means that it's $1,500 cheaper for me to rent than to buy. Of course, this includes the mortgage payment, but more importantly, it also includes maintenance fee and other costs like property taxes that I don't have to pay if I'm simply renting the unit. And what opportunity cost basically means is that what if I took this extra $1,500 if I were to rent instead of buy and did something else with it? Maybe invested it in another asset. For example, the stock market. And not just the $1,500 per month, you also have to take into account the down payment. What if you took the down payment and other closing costs and invested that as well? For the stock market, we have what is called a DRIP calculator, but you can also use a compound interest calculator to do this calculation for yourself. The initial investment amount, for me, I'm using myself as an example, you can do this for yourself as well, is going to be around $85,000 to $90,000 because I'm taking into account that 2 to 5% closing cost plus the down payment that I had to pay that amounted to $70,000. Realistically, it's going to be more than that, but I'm just going to leave it at that. The share price, I'm just going to leave it at 100. Doesn't really matter for this example. And that means that we have 850 shares. Now for the other assumptions, for me, I'm going to use the S&P 500 or the American market as my example. The S&P 500 is an ETF consisting of 500 of the biggest companies in the United States of America. This includes tech, manufacturing, finance, insurance, you name it. It has literally everything. Very diversified and now returning an average of 10% over the last 40 years. Not the last 14 years, 10% over the last 40 years and counting. I'm going to use that as an example to demonstrate this. So the expected share price increase, as we've talked about, is going to be more than 10% according to recent calculations, but we'll leave it at 10% for now. The dividend yield for our sake doesn't really matter, but right now it's 1.1% for the S&P 500, and the expected dividend increase, once again, for us doesn't matter. I'm just going to price this extremely low at 2%, which is below what companies increase their dividends or increase their earnings rather in the S&P 500 by. I'm just going to say 2% just so that we're conservative with our calculations. The last amount is the annual contribution. So we had $1,500 per month that we were putting towards our mortgage that now we have remaining, and we can put it towards our stock market investment or any other investment of your choice. $1,500 times 12 months in the year gives you $18,000. Now we're ready with all of our calculations, and if we hit calculate my returns here, it shows you that you would have $551,000 to be exact, 10 years from today, if you took whatever you would have saved from your mortgage, invested it in the stock market, and let it stay there for 10 years without really touching the money. And you will also note, even though I don't think this matters, that you will have an annual dividend income of more than $6,450, nearly $6,500. This essentially means that you'll be earning more than $500 a month in passive income forever, even if you contribute nothing to this portfolio from this point on. So this is the opportunity cost of you renting versus buying. And as you will see, if you increase the years, if you are young right now in your late 20s, late 30s, early 40s, and you have time to hold money until retirement, if you bump this number of years from 10 to 15, meaning you're holding for longer, this opportunity cost is going to balloon even more, now to $1 million. So you're potentially foregoing $1 million given our calculations. Once again, this is primarily based on this calculation of the market returning 10% annualized for the last 40 years. I know past performance does not imply future returns, but the S&P 500 has shown again and again over the course of decades now that it is going to increase at that 9 to 10% clip. Over the last 5 years, it is actually almost double. This is not your total opportunity cost though after 15 years, this 13% number, because the house market also appreciates. Before we dig deeper, if you are enjoying this video, please smash the like button and the subscribe button if you're interested in learning more about money, how to make more or save more, or just understand it better. The US housing market, for example, has appreciated 5.5% since 1992, so nearly 30 years there. Although that 5.5% rate is still lower than this 13.25% annualized return. Essentially, you can subtract that 5.5%, let's just say 6%, from 13.25%, showing you that you will be up nearly 7% annualized on average if you choose to invest in the stock market over the real estate market. And once again, not that it matters, but you will also have a passive income of nearly $14,000 every year from this portfolio, more than $1,000 a month just for buying and holding. Once again, you don't have to worry about any tenants if you're looking for an investment property, no property managers are involved, no maintenance and repairs. This is going to be deposited directly into your brokerage every single year for buying and holding. So those are the monetary calculations in terms of what you need to buy versus what the opportunity cost is. The only caveat is what you think the growth rate is going to be. For me, I am quite comfortable comparing this to the S&P 500 or a broad market-based index. If you think the rate of stock market growth is going to be less than this, by all means, use that in your own calculations and come up with your own numbers. At the same time, if you think the growth rate of real estate is going to be higher, you can also bump that growth rate up. And ultimately, you might reach the conclusion that 13.25% is a lower growth rate than the real estate market. Another thing that you have to think about is your mobility and flexibility. If you buy a house, you are going to be tied down to that house for an elongated period of time because you're going to spend a large amount of your net worth for a normal person like myself buying a house. Not just the house, the closing costs that we talked about, maintenance and repairs, and also the mental effort and the mental fortitude that goes into making a big life-altering purchase. As opposed to renting where your contracts for leases are usually a year long, or in some countries even lesser than that. So it gives you more mobility and more flexibility when it comes to having the choice in how to live. If you don't like a particular area in the city that you're renting in, you can just move to a new area. But if you bought property in that, moving becomes that much more difficult. Perhaps a less talked about goal and factor you should consider is, what is your overall goal with this purchase? Is your goal to make as much money as possible? Then, as we've seen, perhaps you should be looking at the stock market with indices like the S&P 500 or the NASDAQ 100 returning more than double real estate. The S&P 500 has historically double real estate indices, and the NASDAQ 100 for the last 20-30 years has historically more than double real estate indices. But if your goal is simply to settle down and have a safe asset that also has modest price growth, but it is more for living and increasing the quality of your life, then no amount of return is going to be enough to satisfy or justify a decision to not purchase. If you hate renting so much that buying seems like the only option for you, if you think you found your dream house or your dream apartment, if you think you found your dream location, then nothing that anybody says in terms of total return can, or should rather, convince you not to buy. So what is your goal? Is your goal to make as much money as possible, or is your goal to simply be content with your purchase because you like some intangibles about that purchase, not just the monetary appreciation appreciation because, as we've seen, if you're looking for monetary appreciation, the stock market, particularly the US stock market, seems like a much more probabilistically better bet than the real estate market. The last thing that I found that you should probably consider also is diversification. A lot of the times people become what is known as house poor. In similar terms, putting all of your money into the purchase of the house. For example, if your mortgage payments and other house costs amount to $7,000 a month and your take-home pay for you and your spouse combined, or just for yourself for them, is $8,500, you have a very tight margin for every other expense, including eating out, groceries, entertainment, maybe some emergency costs. This is known as being house poor, where a large percentage of your net worth, even though you're building equity over time, is stuck in the house. You might want to consider diversifying this, which is a common sentiment online. If you are looking to buy a property where the mortgage rate is expected to be around $7,000, but you can buy a smaller property where the mortgage is around $5,000 and would give you more wiggle room for other expenses and also for investment in other assets, it will allow you to diversify your assets for the long run. Just in the case that the real estate market stays stagnant for a few years, where you do not realize that property equity appreciation, and at the same time allows you to look at other assets as well, diversify your wealth, and ensuring that there's no large drawdowns in case the real estate market where you're buying does not do well. And at the same time, if you don't like other assets, you can also buy another property with this. Just do anything with this extra money that you now have just because you made that decision to downsize and not be house poor. Hopefully you can take something away from this and apply these concepts to your house purchasing process as well. The key point is don't over leverage yourself and try to diversify, look at other assets and look at the picture more holistically, not for the next 5 years, but the next 20, 25 or next 30 years, because hopefully you'll be living a long life with your assets. As always, smash the like button and the subscribe button. It really helps the channel out, helps me reach more people. I hope you enjoyed this and I'll see you in the next one.